I may have solved a murder. I'm gonna tell you about it while I take this off. Have you heard of the story of Kate Morgan? Kate was a member of a wealthy Iowa family. In her early 20s, she married a man named Thomas. This is important. The marriage was not a happy one. After 5 years of marriage, Kate ran off with another man named Alan. Then we lose record of Kate for a little while, until 1892 when she checks in at the Hotel Del Coronado. Strangely enough, she didn't check in under her own name. She checked in under the name Lottie A. Bernard. She was a quiet guest at the hotel, but took lots of baths. And back in those days, someone had to run a bath for you. She told the staff that she had stomach cancer and she was waiting for her brother, who was a doctor. But no one came looking for her and no one sent her any letters. After a few days passed, she ventured out into the city to buy a gun. The next night, it started raining extremely hard. It was a storm. We actually investigated this hotel on our YouTube channel, and ironically, it was also storming that night, which honestly is unusual because it's California. It rarely storms. The next morning, her body was discovered laying out on the steps of the veranda. But it doesn't end there. Police were called and it was confirmed that she died of a gunshot wound. But the bullet found in her head did not fit the gun that she purchased. The case was reopened after that fact came to light. In over 100 years, it was never solved. It's been debated by many whether it was self-inflicted or a murder. Some people believe her spirit still resides at this hotel. And since I'm a professional ghost hunter, we decided to investigate. We stayed the night at the hotel and documented all of it. And now, after looking back at all of the footage,
I spent a weekend with one of the most notorious killers in Texas. So in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in South Texas in women's prisons units, helping people find forgiveness and second chances at life. And on this one particular weekend, when we arrived, the correctional officers informed our team that there was a new inmate on the premises. She was only 17 years old and had been tried and convicted as an adult for a very violent crime. And because I was the youngest person on our prison team, they voted me to be the one to work with her because she was young, I was young, and she might relate to me and open up to me. Now, I had a rule for myself when I worked with these women to never look up their crimes. I didn't want it to affect my judgment about them or to affect my willingness to help them, so that was just a rule that I always kept. So the correctional officers, they walked me down this long corridor into a classroom where sitting at the table was Erin Caffey. Now, Erin Caffey is a tiny thing. Now, I'm a tiny person, and I dwarfed her. She's very small, very timid, very soft-spoken, rarely will look you in the eye. And my first thought whenever I lay eyes on her and I sit down across from her is, how can somebody this small and this timid possibly be convicted as an adult for a violent crime? What violence is she possibly capable of? Little did I know. We started talking and we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit, cracked a few jokes. I tried to get her to lighten up. And eventually she did start kind of opening up to me, and she started volunteering some details about her version of what had happened the night of her crime. And I have to admit, even though I had a rule to really try not to know what people had done, I was very curious because, again, here's this tiny little thing. She's 17 years old, looks scared to death, and she's in this facility. And well, her version of the events that took place the night of the crime led me to believe that she was a victim in all of it and that it was really out of her hands. She couldn't stop it, and she's haunted by it, regrets it every day of her life, and she just wishes she could take it all back. And y'all, she was so convincing, just absolutely convincing, that I truly believed that she was innocent. She had somehow gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, was wrongly convicted. And I started brainstorming in my head, like, how can I raise awareness about this and help her get out? Little did I know, in my naivety, that this young lady was a psychopath. She was very cunning, very manipulative, and the small, mousy, timid, soft-spoken thing was very much a calculated tactic to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And my time with her started a long season of my life of panic attacks and nightmares, and I'm going to tell you more about that in part 2.
The case of the Dardine family was one that was deemed too gruesome for news stations and daytime television shows such as Oprah, and to this day, nearly 25 years later, it still remains unsolved. The family consisted of 29-year-old Russell Keith, wife Ruby Elaine, who was 30 and 7 months pregnant at the time, and their 3-year-old son, who they had named Peter. The growing family had recently moved to the small town of Ina, Illinois in 1986 and were living in a rented-out trailer near Route 37. And though this was a small town, it did not have a reputation for being the safest. During the past 2 years, this small town had experienced 15 homicides, including that of a 10-year-old girl that had recently been murdered in the area. This had left everyone in the town, including the Dardines, on edge, and in fact, when a woman had approached the trailer asking for help one night, Keith would flat out deny her and ask her to leave the property. The family had felt so unsafe here that Keith had told his mother, Joanne Dardine, that regardless if he had a job lined up or not, he and the family would be moving out of the small town by the end of the year. But then came the night of November 17th, 1987. Keith, who had always been described as a reliable worker, had failed to show up to work that night, and after workers and family had failed to reach either him or Elaine, they decided to contact the police. Keith's father had agreed to meet with officials at the Dardine residence, unaware of the horrors that they were about to discover. There is a major trigger warning for the rest of this episode, but once Keith's father and officials had made their way into the household, they would discover 3 bodies that were tucked inside Keith and Elaine's bed. The bodies had belonged to that of Elaine, their 3-year-old son Peter, and the newborn infant that Elaine had given birth to during the attack. All had been found deceased in the bed. Keith's body was nowhere to be found within the house, and much to the shock of the family, this led investigators to believe him to be the prime suspect in this case. But that theory would be put to rest when just the very next day, a group of hunters would find Keith Dardine's body about a mile away from their trailer. He had been found, shot 3 times, and then sexually mutilated. His car would also later be found right in front of the police department in that town. The town immediately began to swirl with rumors, as over 30 detectives had to chase down over 1,000 leads, but unfortunately those leads really came to nothing. There was no sign of an affair, drug use or drug selling, or any type of gambling debt that the family could have had, and this went on for years until one solid lead came up, which I'll have to make in a part 2.
Undressed from the waist down, covered in blood, scratches, dirt, and injuries especially noted on her neck.
Wait, did you say how far away from the school they found her, or like just in a random street?
It was not far at all. They were, it was like the school perimeter.
Oh, okay,
so the school,
right.
right outside the school, like fences pretty much, there was bushland, forest.
This is the true story of the Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers are warlocks with the ability to shapeshift and become animals or people. They can not only take your appearance, but also clone your voice perfectly. The biggest Skinwalker sightings have been in Ohio and Arizona, but they are found all over the world. The preferred form of Skinwalkers is that of your pet. They take the form of your pet and enter your home and try to act like your pet to gain your trust, and then they can take your life. Watch how in this video the boy realizes that his dog is a Skinwalker.
Let me see. I'll know if she's my dog. Merlin, sit. Turn around. Turn around. Lay down. You're not my dog. My dog don't know how to do no fucking trick. The fuck? Call 911. Hey! Somebody!
He's sorry. Oh, he's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry.
Kaj je to? Bravo.
Au, Isuse Bože.
Ček, to je li to ono opet?
To je likvid piše.
Dobro, daj. Nemam pojma, daj ga šutni, ja ne znaš. Daj ga šutni.
Neću se. Mislim da je pijan nešto.
Okej, mislim da idemo ovdje. Ajmo mi odavdje, ajmo.
Fuck, Isuse Bože, ti mu vidio facu prima,
Pa naravno da se vidio u facu, vidi se.
Nisam skužio, čekaj, kaj je bilo s tim?
This is one of the most sickening and disturbing cases I ever covered, and it will make any true crime fan's stomach turn. This is the case of Jennifer Dougherty. This case took place in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is a relatively small area. Jennifer was 30 years old and was extremely kind and sweet. She loved to dance and she trusted everyone she ever encountered. This is because she had some mental disabilities, and this disability even affected her keeping up with her peers in school. And she always got bullied and teased, but she always chose kindness over anything else. She then started going to this community center when she finally thought she met her friends. And these supposed friends were Angela, Peggy, Amber, Melvin, Ricky, and Robert. And you will soon find out why they weren't her friends. These 6 people all lived together, and Angela was 17, who was pregnant with Ricky's baby, who was 23 years old. Amber was 20, who was pregnant with Melvin Knight's baby. Peggy was 27, and Robert was 36. Now remember, Jennifer was 30 years old, but due to the mental disability she had the mental capabilities of a 12 to 14-year-old person. The 6 of them and Jennifer hung out for a while, but soon after, Angela became extremely jealous of Jennifer. This is because her boyfriend Ricky would always flirt with Jennifer when they all hung out. So Angela and Amber came up with this whole screwed up plan. On February 10th, 2010, Jennifer was invited to a sleepover with her friends. And before she left a note for her mom that said, "Have a great day at work, and I love you very much." Right when Jennifer stepped into the apartment house, she was subjected to 36 hours of extreme hell. The group went through her purse and stole money, gift cards, and her cell phone. They poured liquids into her bag, hit her head with filled soda bottles, cut her hair, painted her face with nail polish, and dumped liquids and spices on her head. They then took turns violently hitting Jennifer with a metal towel rack and crutches. Jennifer was also stripped naked, gagged, and then raped by Melvin. They even forced her to drink cooking oil, nail polish, detergent, different medications, and even urine. And keep in mind, this whole time, Jennifer completely trusted them because she thought that they were all her friends. But they were literally dehumanizing her. They then continued pouring all of these things and spices on her head, and Jennifer was crying that her eyes hurt and she couldn't see. But they didn't listen and continued pouring. And after they decided they tortured her enough, they took her life. They then tied her up in Christmas lights and forced her to write a fake suicide note, essentially saying that everything that happened to her was self-inflicted. The first line reads, "I have not been feeling happy for a while now, and I also feel everybody will be better off without me." Which is just sad because that wasn't the case. Jennifer was extremely loved. Once the note was written, they got a knife and stabbed Jennifer to death. And once they knew she was dead, they tied her up in Christmas lights again, stuffed her body inside a garbage can, and dumped it in the parking lot of a middle school, where her body would be discovered by a truck driver the next day on February 11th. Even though Angela orchestrated the whole thing, she avoided the death penalty because she was 17 and a minor. But she ended up getting life without parole. Melvin got the death sentence. Ricky was also given the death penalty, and Peggy, Amber, and Robert were given 30 to 72 years in prison. This case is just so sickening and disturbing, and it stuck with me after I read it, and I feel extremely bad for Jennifer and her family. I wish nothing but the worst for those 6 people who did this to Jennifer.
Welcome to the darker side of history. Today we're diving into some of the strangest, most unsettling, and downright creepy facts that you may have never heard of. So if you're ready to take a journey into the bizarre, sit back and let's get started. Fact number 1, the dancing plague of 1518. Yes, you heard that right, dancing. In the summer of 1518, in Strasbourg, a small town in France, people began dancing uncontrollably. It started with just one woman, Frau Trophea. She stepped into the street one day and started dancing. Nothing too strange, right? But she didn't stop. Not for hours, not for days. Soon, dozens of others joined her, and before long, hundreds were caught up in this mysterious dancing epidemic. People danced until their feet bled. Some reportedly collapsed from exhaustion and even died. No one really knows why it happened. Some blamed mass hysteria, others believed it was a curse. But one thing's for sure, it's one of history's most unsettling mysteries. Fact number 2, the corpse of Pope Formosus. In 897, a strange and morbid trial took place in the Vatican. Pope Stephen VI ordered the exhumation of his predecessor, Pope Formosus. Formosus had been dead for months. His body was dug up, dressed in papal robes, and placed on a throne in a court known as the Cadaver Synod. Stephen VI accused the corpse of crimes, berated it, and demanded answers. When the rotting body didn't respond, of course, it was found guilty. As punishment, the corpse was stripped of its garments, 3 fingers were cut off, and it was thrown into the Tiber River. The trial may sound absurd, but it tells us a lot about the deep political conflicts in the church at the time. Stephen himself was strangled to death in prison not long after the trial. Creepy, right? But don't get too comfortable just yet. We're only getting started. Fact number 3, Tarare, the French man who could eat anything. Tarare was a French soldier in the late 18th century who had an insatiable appetite. He could eat anything, literally. He started with large amounts of food, enough to feed 15 people in one sitting. But that was just the beginning. Soon, Tarare began eating things you wouldn't believe: corks, stones, live animals, and even human flesh. His bizarre hunger earned him a spot in military experiments where they used him to swallow documents that could be passed through enemy lines. The military had to let him go, though, when they realized he couldn't control his hunger. He was suspected of eating a toddler, but fled before they could confirm. His death, a gruesome end. His body was found riddled with disease and parasites. It's hard to say if Tarare was just a medical oddity or something darker, but either way, his story is one that sticks with you. Fact number 4, the Blood Countess. You've probably heard of Dracula, but did you know there was a real-life figure even more terrifying? Meet Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman from the 16th century, also known as the Blood Countess. Bathory is believed to have killed hundreds of young girls, mostly servants, in one of history's largest killing sprees. The legend says she would bathe in their blood, believing it would keep her youthful forever. Historians debate whether the blood-bathing stories are exaggerated, but the bodies of her victims were found in her castle. She was eventually caught and imprisoned, but not before her legacy as one of the most notorious female serial killers was sealed forever. Fact number 5, the London Monster. Before Jack the Ripper terrorized London, there was the London Monster. In the late 18th century, women across the city were being attacked by a mysterious figure who would follow them in the streets and, in many cases, stab them with a knife or sharp object, specifically targeting their buttocks or thighs. This series of assaults went on for years, and Londoners became so fearful that men even created monster hunting groups. Eventually, a man named Renwick Williams was arrested and convicted for the crimes, but many believe he may have been innocent, making the true identity of the London Monster yet another unsolved mystery. Fact number 6, the Mummy's Curse. In 1922, archaeologists led by Howard Carter opened the tomb of King Tutankhamun in Egypt. Shortly after, people involved with the excavation began to die under mysterious circumstances. Lord Carnarvon, who financed the expedition, died suddenly from an infected mosquito bite. Many believed it was the curse of the pharaohs, an ancient spell placed on anyone who dared disturb the resting place of Egypt's kings. The curse gained even more attention as more members of the excavation team passed away over the years. While scientists today say the deaths were likely coincidence, the legend of the mummy's curse continues to chill the spines of those fascinated by ancient Egypt. Fact number 7, the ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. In 1872, a ship called the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship was in perfect condition. It had plenty of supplies, and nothing seemed out of place, except for one thing: its crew had completely vanished. No one knows what happened to the people on board. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of piracy, and nothing missing. Theories range from natural disasters to mutiny, but the truth? It's still one of history's great unsolved maritime mysteries. Fact number 8, the Green Children of Woolpit. In the 12th century, children with green-tinted skin mysteriously appeared in the English village of Woolpit. They spoke an unknown language and wore strange clothing. The children were weak and refused to eat anything but raw beans. Eventually, their skin returned to a normal color, and they learned to speak English. They claimed to be from a place called St. Martin's Land, a subterranean world where the sun never shines. Historians have struggled to explain their story. And while some dismiss it as folklore, others wonder if there's a deeper, weirder truth behind the tale of the green children. And there you have it, 8 bizarre, creepy, and unsettling facts from history. From dancing plagues to mysterious vanishings, these stories remind us that the past isn't always what it seems. There are countless mysteries buried in the of history some will never solve. If you enjoyed this dive into the strange, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Who knows what other eerie tales we'll uncover next time? Until then, stay curious and stay cautious.
This is by far one of the scariest unsolved murders. Let's talk about it. This is Russell and Shirley Dermond. They were married for 64 years and went on to have 4 kids together. They were living in a nice house in a gated community on Lake Oconee in Putnam County, Georgia, and they were really enjoying their peaceful retired life. They were extremely loved by the community, but on May 6, 2014, their lives would tragically end. Russell and Shirley were last seen alive on May 1st running some errands in Eatonton, and they last spoke to their son later that same day on the phone. A few days later, on May 3rd, the couple was supposed to attend a party with their neighbors for the 2014 Kentucky Derby, but they never showed up. 3 more days would pass with no word from the Dermonds, and their neighbors became so worried that they went to their house to check on them. When they arrived, they found that the front door was unlocked, so they let themselves in. Everything inside the house seemed perfectly fine, but when the neighbor entered the garage, they found Russell's decapitated body lying in a pool of blood surrounded by towels. They obviously called 911 immediately because of the horrific scene, and when police arrived, they quickly realized that Shirley was missing. Police initially thought that Shirley had been kidnapped, so a massive search was launched. But sadly, 10 days later, Shirley's decomposed body was found floating in Lake Oconee by a couple of fishermen. She had initially been weighed down by 2 30-pound concrete blocks. According to the autopsy, Shirley died from 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object. Authorities initially believed that the murder stemmed from a robbery, but there were no signs of a break-in and nothing was taken from their home. Hundreds of tips and leads started pouring in, but to this day, the case remains unsolved. And the most horrifying part is that Russell's head has never been found. According to reports, gunshot residue was found on his collar, leading authorities to believe that he was decapitated after being shot in the head in order to stop police from finding the bullet. Over the years, people have speculated that the Dermonds' deaths were related to their oldest son, Mark. Mark was killed in Atlanta in 2000 during a drug dispute, but police strongly believe that there is no connection. What makes this case so confusing is that there's still so many unanswered questions. Police still don't know whether or not the killer entered through the front gate of the community or if they had access to the back of the house by boat, but they do believe that multiple people were involved. Police also believe that the towels surrounding Russell's decapitated body were placed there to stop his blood from seeping out underneath the garage door. And as far as the concrete blocks tied to Shirley's body, investigators said that a professional would know that that wouldn't work. So the question remains on who would do this and why. According to police, new DNA evidence and cell phone data was discovered last year that they are hoping will lead to the people responsible. But they don't know if it's enough DNA evidence to be run through CODIS or if it even belongs to the killer. At this point, it could still just belong to Russell and Shirley. Investigators are using new technology to analyze the recent cell phone data found that wasn't existent in 2014, so they remain hopeful. But it's now been 10 years, and whoever killed Russell and Shirley and took his head is still out there.
One of the most successful serial killers in history is never talked about. Let's talk about Julia Tofana, who was said to have killed around 600 men. That is a lot of men. There is little known about Julia's life and upbringing. No pictures, nothing. This story takes place in the Renaissance period in Italy. Back then, women didn't really have any rights. Like, at all. They were usually forced into arranged, loveless marriages. In this time, when you got married, your husband owned you. Men had full ownership and control over their wives. Husbands would often beat their wives without any consequence. And unfortunately for the women, divorce was basically non-existent at the time. It wasn't even an option. So safe to say there was a lot of women stuck in abusive and loveless marriages with no way out. That's until Julia started her little business. Julia created an odorless, tasteless, and colorless, undetectable poison, and she put it in makeup products. She disguised her poison in beauty products that women could easily keep on their vanity and no one would question it. She called it Aqua Tofana. Pretty cool name. This product would allow women to discreetly kill their husbands over the span of 4 days. A few drops every day,
And the initial symptoms would simply seem like a flu. A few more drops the next few days, and it would slowly weaken and eventually kill the men. You're probably wondering how she got away with killing all of these men without anybody noticing. Well, Julia was very careful. She didn't just sell aqua tofana to anyone. Any new client had to be verified by a past client and have a background check. Julia's clients were actually really protective over her as well and kept her secret. This went on for over 20 years. Julia would also coach the women on how to act around the days of the poison. After the first day, when the husband starts getting the flu symptoms, to act really concerned and call a doctor. The doctor would come and assume it was just a basic illness, give them medication, and leave. The key was that the women were the ones to call the doctor. They had to act concerned, anxious. When the husbands would eventually die, the doctors would be baffled. And the key to all this was that the women were told to demand an autopsy. But the thing about aqua tofana is that it was undetectable in an autopsy, meaning that all of these deaths came back as natural causes. Unfortunately, the story is too long for one video, so come back for part 2 to see what happens next.
This woman created such disturbing videos that she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. This story is truly one of the worst things that I've ever covered here on TikTok, so if you have a weak stomach or you can't hear about animal cruelty, please keep scrolling. So this is Ashley Richards from Houston, Texas. In 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of producing and 1 count of distributing these disturbing videos. And once again, I'm going to warn you, you can keep scrolling at any time before we get into these details. So this all started in 2012 when PETA, or the group known as People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, contacted the Houston police about a video they had found online. This film was titled Ebony Kill Cat, and it depicted extremely sadistic and cruel acts being forced upon a kitten. So the police got into contact with the people from PETA, and they then sent them 20 additional videos. These videos depicted the sadistic torture of various animals, including kittens, a fish, pigeon, crayfish, mice, a rabbit, all being tortured with different things like high heels, knives, screwdrivers, and pliers. In the videos, the woman that appeared in them was wearing a Mardi Gras style mask, and she would talk suggestively to the people watching this torture. Yes, that meant that there were paying customers out there that were paying this woman to produce these absolutely horrific videos. I cannot share the details of some of these videos. You can actually find the information online through news articles, but I mean, I think I changed as a person after reading these articles. Eventually, though, the police were able to track Ashley's IP address, which led them to her suburban home in Houston. This is an example of one of the messages she shared with the client. I mean, just, ugh. That led them to Brent Justice and Ashley Richards. These were the two that were producing these videos and selling them on a website online. And Congress had recently passed a bill making this specific type of video material, otherwise known as crush, illegal. So thankfully they were arrested. Shockingly though, Brent Justice, after the trial, he was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. Shockingly though, Ashley, the woman who actually carried out these acts on camera, was only sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, personally, this is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about, and I definitely think she should have been in prison for a lot longer, but that's the justice system.
One day when I was a junior in high school, the bell had just rung, and I was on my way to art class. It was on the furthest end of the school, so I was walking pretty quickly to get there in time. All of a sudden, an announcement came on the intercom. It was the secretary from the front desk of the school. Her voice was shaky as she announced that the school had just been placed on lockdown, and everyone needed to get inside the room closest to them and follow lockdown procedures. Before hanging up, she said that this was not a drill. There was silence for a moment before total chaos erupted in the hallways. Everyone was running around and there were papers and books being scattered about. I was nearly to the art room at this point, so I ended up just sprinting there. When I got there, the room was bustling with people running in all different directions. After letting a few more people into the room, the teacher decided to close the door and lock it. We turned off the lights and then all gathered in the back of the classroom where we wouldn't be visible from the window in the door. It was almost completely silent in the room despite there being at least 30 people in there. I was doing my best not to expect the worst. Maybe this was just a false alarm. The teacher got a notification on her phone and we watched as her eyes grew wide as she read it. In a hushed voice, she informed us that there had been a murder in a neighborhood down the road from the school, and the police had reason to think the suspect was hiding somewhere nearby, possibly in the school. I couldn't believe what was happening. This seemed like something from a horror movie. One of the younger girls in the class was so scared that she was crying and shaking, and a few other kids were trying to comfort her. Because I was sitting closest to the supply closet, the teacher asked me to go in the closet and grab a blanket. The supply closet was a very spacious walk-in closet with rows of shelves on either side. I scanned the shelves looking for a blanket when all of a sudden I noticed something strange. In the back corner of the closet were long pieces of fabric hanging up that were used for sewing projects. Behind the fabric, I saw a pair of dirty shoes. Someone was hiding back there. I wondered why they weren't with the rest of the class when all of a sudden it hit me. Was that the murder suspect? My heart was beating like crazy. I knew the best thing I could do was pretend I didn't know the person was there. Trying to appear as calm as possible, I grabbed the blanket before turning off the lights in the closet and shutting the door. I handed the blanket to the girl before going up to the teacher and whispering to her what I had seen. I knew if the other students found out what I had seen, there would be a panic and that would not end well. I could see the fear in the teacher's eyes, but she said nothing, just picked up her phone and sent a message to the front desk. 10 minutes of silence went by before the teacher got another notification. She then stood up and told us that she had been told that we needed to walk calmly out of the classroom and go to the middle school across the street until the school was cleared. We did as we were told. Part of me was sure that the suspect was going to chase after us, but the closet door remained shut. Once we were out of the school, we began running at a full-on sprint until we reached the middle school. We stayed there for hours until our parents were eventually able to come pick us up. On the news that night, we found out that the SWAT team came to the school and was able to capture the suspect without anyone getting hurt. A shiver goes down my spine anytime I go into the closet, even now.